Hi, I'm Melissa, and this is The Book Break. Today on our show, we're talking to an incredible sci-fi author, Kevin Ikenberry. Let's go! All right, guys, here is Kevin Ikenberry. So, Kevin, you are pretty incredible, and I might be a little biased because I've heard you speak, and you have some great books. So let's start off with your books.
Okay.
Tell us, first, how many books do you have?
Just published the 10th novel in December of last year.
Wow, okay. So you are sci-fi, which...
Yes.
Let's admit it, we love sci-fi.
Absolutely.
All right, tell us a little bit about your most recent book.
So my most recent book is a collaboration with my friend Quincy Allen. It's in the Four Horsemen universe, which is a best-selling military sci-fi universe.
Yes.
It's been in existence for about 3 years now, has about 50 books. I'm one of the core authors in the universe, so it means that I have kind of control over a certain aspect, and that is the peacemakers, the law enforcement arm of this particular series.
Yeah.
And Quincy and I wrote a story about an alien that we call an Ugar, who's essentially a 9.5-foot tall, big purple bear with an attitude, and it's perfect. The book is called Enforcer.
Yeah, and I love that it's military sci-fi because that puts in another aspect to it than your typical everyday sci-fi.
Absolutely.
So how did you get into writing?
So it's actually, I was more in the military than I was ever writing, so I'm not one of those people that would ever tell you I was going to be a writer at a young age. I was told in high school I was a good writer, I was told in college I was a good writer, and I did nothing with that. And then fast forward to I was on active duty, I was teaching ROTC in Indiana, and one Tuesday afternoon I had a character start talking to me. And I went to my battalion commander and said, "Can I go back and take a class?" He said, "Sure." So I turned in the first assignment and the instructor said, "Why aren't you published?" And I've been writing ever since.
That's awesome. So tell us about how you got published. What was your process with that?
So the first book I ever tried to write, that idea I had on that Idle Tuesday, took me about 18 months to write, and it was an awful mess by the time it was done. And when I had an idea for another book, I wanted to do it differently, and so I started learning outlining, and I reached out to a mentor, Lou Anders, who was the editorial director at Pyre Books at the time, and he kind of walked me through character development and plot development and how to outline, and the end result was I wrote that second book in 7 weeks, and that was my debut novel, Sleeper Protocol.
Your character development is incredible, and you teach about character development. So for aspiring authors, tell me a little bit about just your top tips with character development.
I think you've got to do a couple of things. One, you can't forget the bad guy. We always think about our protagonists and we think about the cast of characters around them, but you have to have a well-developed antagonist. They have to be powerful, they have to be committed, and they really have to have their own story as they go along. They have their own journey, if you will. We talk about the hero's journey. Well, your antagonist has a journey too.
Yes.
And if you don't develop that out over time, the bad guy is not going to be resonating with the audience, and it's actually something that can kill a book. So don't forget the bad guy. That's the biggest one.
Yeah, and I love that because so many people do focus on the hero's journey that in less well-developed books, the bad guy does get forgotten a lot.
Absolutely. And in the case of Sleeper Protocol, I worked on this idea, and then all of a sudden I had the right ideas who the antagonist was, and the minute that I did that, I finished the book very quickly, and it was my debut. It just was perfect. So.
And I love that you mentioned how the beginning of it was a mess, because so many times I see prospective authors write their first draft and then just get discouraged. But you got to remember that first draft is just your first draft.
Absolutely. You have to dare to be bad, as one of my mentors says. Dare to be bad because you can always fix it later in editing.
Yeah.
And that was probably the biggest lesson that I had was it was okay to type out that first draft and have it suck because I can fix it, and then I can fix it a little bit more and I can get it to the point where it's publishable.
Yeah, that's great. Now, how did you get involved in collaborations? Because a lot of folks don't really understand that process.
So the first time I actually collaborated on a story, this was probably in 2010, 2011, and I was a member of what they called the Online Writing Workshop for Science Fiction and Fantasy and Horror. And I met a gentleman from Australia, and we kind of had talked about our own stories, and then one evening he sent me an email and said, "Hey, I've written 1,400 words of this, and I don't know what to do with it. What would you do if you had the story idea?"
Yeah.
And so I read his 1,400 words, and I immediately added about another 2,000 to it, and then he added a couple thousand, and long story short, we actually sold that to an Australian magazine in 2011.
Oh, wow.
And that was my first collaboration. And I've done it a couple times now with a couple of books. I've got a book coming with Eric Flint that's a collaboration as well. And the biggest challenge with collaboration is somebody needs to be in charge. Collaborations have always been a fun way to do it. I have a friend, Kevin Steverson. He and I wrote Redacted Affairs in the Four Horsemen universe late last year. And it became kind of a little competition because he would send me his word count in the morning, say, I wrote 3,000 words, can you beat that? Well, then I would try my best to beat that. And we ended up writing that book fairly quickly, but it all went back to having someone in charge. In that case, it was me. And we identified the story outline, we identified what we wanted to do, and it was a great process.
That's great. And so, because you're retired Army, I'm guessing you pull some of your experiences into your military sci-fi.
Absolutely. Yeah, the things that you can do that resonate with the readers. I had a reader one time reach out, and their only thing in the Amazon review was, I appreciate that you got the call for artillery fire correct. I'm like, yeah, well, I've done that before, so I understand how that works. Exactly.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you guys for joining us on the Book Break. We'll see you next time.